Welcome to Nightlight. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other light-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and, with a little luck, some wisdom. This is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone. And now, here is your host, the lovely, delightful, insightful, and all-around great gal, Ms. Barbara DeLong.
Good evening, everybody, and my thanks to Ken Quiet Hawk for his unique introduction. He never fails to surprise me. We have a special guest tonight, and I'm really excited to bring this man to you because he is so full of philosophical knowledge and wisdom in directions that not many of us have gone in before. And I am thrilled that he's, here to share with us tonight. Jeffrey Daugherty is known as the Christian whistleblower. He was a Pentecostal minister for over 20 years. He's a Bible college graduate with over 100,000 hours of study in the biblical text, and he has combined 36 years of spiritual experience across the spectrum. He's authored 14 books, of which I've only managed to read 5, but I can highly, highly, highly recommend 2 of them. Not that the others aren't good, but the ones that were my favorites were Apostle Paul, the Antichrist, and The Final Message of the Last Apostle. Both of them I found to be educational, interesting. They are definitely, they're not an easy read, but they're a good read. You have to pay attention, but it's not the kind of thing you have to break your neck over because it does flow beautifully. They're written very, very well, and I thoroughly enjoyed them. You can find Jeffrey at www.jeffreydaugherty.com, and please don't miss out on checking out his YouTube channel. He's got over 900 videos there, and they run full spectrum. You will definitely find things that you'll enjoy, things that will outrage you, but above all, everything up there will make you think. And that's really, really what everything we do is meant to do, because as long as you people are thinking and questioning, then basically our jobs are done. Jeffrey, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me, Barbara. It's always my honor to be with you, and I was interested to see what you were going to say when you said he's full of, and there was a little pause. I wasn't sure what was coming next.
Well, you are full of wisdom, and actually, but your method of delivering it sometimes, it catches people up short, but it always makes people think, and maybe go muttering around to saying, "I'm going to check that out because he can't possibly be right," but you are, and so it's amazing how you take something that has become humdrum to most of us, and you make it interesting, fascinating. And I mean, both of the books that are my favorites, I learned a great deal from. And I'm very grateful that you wrote them, because I probably wouldn't have investigated these 2 guys myself at all, ever. Only because the biblical stuff is really not my major forte, though I'm fascinated by it. I know enough to get in trouble, but that's about it. And so I thoroughly enjoyed those two books. You're just writing so many books that you can't keep up with you. So, because when I started talking to you, you didn't have 14 books out there, and I forget how many it was, but while I was trying to wade through all of your books, you wrote a couple more.
Well, that's one of the benefits of only sleeping 5 hours a day, Barbara.
I would think so. When I was sitting back thinking, how do we start tonight? It occurred to me that religion has played an important part in our lives as long as we have been sentient beings, just about. The element of religion or gods or some majestic higher authority that we could, seek advice and knowledge and wisdom and protection from. And it's kind of interesting how over time religion has evolved into a completely different aspect within our lives.
It really is. And if you think about it anthropologically, there's been about 50,000 years that humans have had culture sophisticated enough to support religious beliefs. And for about 48,000 of those years, the religions across the board were mainly nature-based, mainly, were of an idea to get along with one another. There were certain gods that did certain things for certain people, and everyone just kind of, smiled and did their business and got along. It wasn't, at all uncommon to have great feasts and celebrations where people from, various religious backgrounds and, very firm convictions would be able to, have a good time together, drink some grog or some ale or whatever. But in the last 2,000 years, the rise of, maybe 3,000 years at the most, the rise of monotheism has cropped up. Mm-hmm. And monotheism is my God is bigger than your God, my God can beat your God, and my God's the only God, and it's caused great bloodshed, great fear, great guilt, and it really is a titanic change in the way that religion is portrayed and the way that religion is celebrated. And the thing that we lose track of is that's a very Johnny-come-lately attitude. Only, 2,000 out of 50,000 years have we thought that way. And I would hope that if we sit back and take account and think it over, that we might realize that maybe we should think about how we've done this and maybe give a little more credence to the way we did it most of the time than the way we've been doing it here just the last little bit, culturally speaking.
Yeah, because if we went back thousands of years, 5,000, 6,000 years ago, it was the religion and the belief that kept communities together.
Absolutely.
And when you get up into the Roman and the Greek and the Egyptian eras, it takes on a whole nother flavor. It's almost as though the priesthood is now manipulating the people. It's kind of like you have to, pay to pray, just about, and the gods won't listen unless you have sacrificed to them, unless you have given something to them. And it seems to me that when Christianity came about, everything got even worse. And I can only speak personally for myself, but I have pulled away from an organized religion, feeling more comfortable with my own personal belief system as far as a creator and stuff like that. But people today cling to the churches, and I don't think they understand what it is they're actually clinging to.
I think you're right. And Barbara, it's not my job to tell anyone, what to believe or what to believe in. I spent 6 years in the United States military, and one of my core beliefs is that people have the right to self-determination and thought and religious practice. And I also believe that people have the right to have as much of the facts available to them as possible in making their decisions. So when I talk about Christianity and expose what I call the cracks in big-time religion, it's not necessarily to tell somebody what to believe, but it's an effort to give them as much information as they possibly can. To put it in a rather mundane analogy, I'm like a dealer at a card table, and I'm dealing all of the cards face up. So you can draw the hand that you want and play it as you please, but you deserve, in my opinion, to know what lies beneath the foundation of your religion. And that's what I'm about, is just delivering the mail, giving people the information. And if they, like you said, if they think and look and read, my work here is completed.
Yeah, no, it amazes me with, and I've listened to a lot of your shows too, and I highly recommend people tune in. You don't have a schedule. I
do now, actually. I have sort of a schedule. We do have live shows every day on the YouTube channel, which you can find just by Jeff Daugherty YouTube or Christian Whistleblower YouTube. We do have a schedule at 11 a.m., 5 p.m., and 11 p.m. We have live shows every day, but we usually have a whole lot more in between there that are and will remain, unfortunately, unscheduled.
It's sort of like when the Spirit moves you, you get on the YouTube thing here.
Well, I'm doing a lot of counseling with people and working with people one-on-one, so that takes up a lot of time. And when I have gaps, that's when I'll create additional programming for the channel.
Well, I got to tell you, clearly there is a calling here, because nobody else could have possibly put this many YouTubes up there if there wasn't a real drive inside of them to put information out there for other people. And I think YouTube is a beautiful place to put it, because it's an amazing audience. And certainly you have a great many that follow you, and I can imagine that that's going to blossom over the next couple of years for sure, because we are at a time where, on a consciousness level, humanity is really going through a renaissance of awakening that I am so delighted to see. And I think one of the, I don't know how to get, I think one of the most interesting and exciting things that you brought up in one of your books was that the story behind Christianity of a Savior being born and having disciples and being crucified and rising on the third day and that whole thing, it can be traced back. It's not unique unto Christianity.
Not even close to unique, Barbara. And as we go into the holiday season, one of the things that used to really bother me, but now it just makes me chuckle, is you see the appearance of these bumper stickers that say "Keep Christ in Christmas," and it makes me laugh, because there was Christmas 3,000-4,000 years before there was ever Christ. So, it really is just to put it mildly, it's just plagiarism. They blatantly stole from other religions everything about the Christ, from the day he was born, from the stable, from the wise men, from the star, even to the king being after him, born of a virgin. And it's from that all the way through to the purported crucifixion, 3 days in the ground, resurrection. All of that is not even close to unique. And it's if they had done that today, they could be sued for plagiarism and would definitely lose in that suit.
Yeah, and in one of your books, and I'm not sure which one it is, I think it's The Final Message of the Last Apostle, you list it. There have to be 20 or 30 different times through history that this same pattern has been replicated, whether it's Roman or Greek or Egyptian, or it's full spectrum, so that this story has been told thousands of years before Christ. Thousands of years before the story of Jesus is purported to have occurred.
Absolutely, and that list could easily have been over 100 long, but I figured the 30 or 40 that I did list was enough to make the point.
Oh, it makes the point well. And I had not realized that there were so many. I knew there were a lot, but I didn't realize there were as many as there were. And when you see that many with the exact same agenda, with the exact same script, so to speak, you do begin to sit back and say, well, wait a minute, did those early guys just think, well, let's take this pattern, it's worked so well in the past, we'll let it play out yet again?
And when you think about the historical context of it, Barbara, you're talking about a Roman Empire that stretched across the entire known world, and represented in that territory controlled by Rome were many disparate religions, many religions with many different gods, many different faiths, many different ways to believe, many different holidays, many different customs. And it was a centripetal force. It was pulling apart the empire because there was no unifying aspect. And what they did by creating the Jesus Christ story as it is now written, they gave them one unified thing that they could all, that was common and in their memory, and gave them at least something that they could focus on. And it became a centrifugal or a centripetal force, one that came together. It was centrifugal, which pulled them apart. But it became a unifying force, especially when the Roman army went along with the Roman short sword, which was the original weapon of mass destruction, and said, convert or die. It became a particularly effective tool.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you had people believing in the same God, calling on the same name, worshiping on the same dates, and at least it gave them a little salve to say, okay, well, we kind of did this before in another name, but we'll do this now. So it was a very, very ingenious political move, and we know we lose sight of that today, that it was essentially a political move, and it was something that bound together an empire that was starting to show signs of coming apart at the seams.
And yet today, people see, what gets me is the people blindly listen to the pulpit and don't bother to research themselves. And for me, that is something that aggravates. I'm not saying you have to go out and read the Bible, but I am saying, when things like this come up and you want to question it, investigate it, look into it. One of the things that is said in the Bible is to, question everything. And we are at a point in time where a great many people, and there's such change coming with consciousness, it's unbelievable. People are waking up on all sorts of different levels. And I'm not saying that people shouldn't have a spiritual belief system, because I truly believe that that's important. But if you're going to have a religious belief system, make sure you know what you're believing in.
Exactly. And, for a long time, it's hard to fault people, because if you think about back when Christianity started a couple thousand years ago, there weren't that many people that were literate. There really weren't, a lot of Bibles being passed around. And the church, the clergy, who were typically higher educated and had, the money to have luxuries like books, kept it all very closely controlled. And that was the case for a long time. But here we are now in 2017, and let's just be very conservative. For the last 20 years, we've all had access to this thing called the internet, and it's impossible now for any type of a religious organization to keep the beliefs and the doctrines away from people. And I mean, even when I was in the ministry, when I first started out, I spent 20 years, as you said, as a preacher. And even then, you had to spend a lot of money on these study books, these interlinears, these concordances. I spent thousands of dollars on these books, and a lot of people weren't going to spend that money, and they weren't going to invest that time. But now, anyone with a little bit of interest that wants to turn off the TV for a little while can go on places like BibleHub.com. I'm not affiliated with that. I don't get any money from that. But BibleHub.com will show you the original text, a direct, literal English rendering, and you can literally know as much as any PhD-level seminarian knows. So there is literally no excuse anymore to not know. And with that comes a lot of responsibility, Barbara, because now it's not that we don't know. It's not that this information has been kept from us. We're not ignorant anymore. We don't lack knowledge. Now it comes down to the point of being lazy and not willing to do it ourselves. And you move from a place of ignorance to a place that isn't quite as comfortable when you have access to something and don't look at it, or when you're presented with something and won't believe it. And you move from a place of ignorance to a place that I call stupid. Not a lot of people like that word, but stupid would mean having the information and rejecting it. Ignorant would mean not having access to it. Mm-hmm. So shame on us if we don't do our due diligence turn off the TV and actually find out what lies between or lies under the foundation. What is the foundation of our belief system?
Well, and when you stop to think about it, for thousands of years, the texts that make up the Bible and all of the other texts have purposely been kept from us. Now, they all weren't written in the same language, and when Constantine put his Bible together, it was all transformed into Latin. And then King James came around, and he was the same way. Instead of translating it into standard English, he translated it into court English, which the common man didn't speak and didn't understand. So that Bible, for hundreds of years, the common folk couldn't read because they couldn't understand the language that it was written in, even though it was English.
That's absolutely true. And if you think about it, when you go back to the New Testament, that people don't realize that the New Testament was written under Roman occupation. The Roman army was occupying Jerusalem. And it wasn't always a nice occupation. They were under military rulership. They were under military occupation from a foreign power. And there was this group of people that were called the censors, the censors. And their job was to read every bit of information that was published by that indigenous population to make sure that there was nothing that was against Rome, nothing that could cause people to revolt against Rome, nothing that was, outside of the party line. So the New Testament, as we have it, was vetted and approved by the Roman Empire, the original New World Order, if you will. And if you bring that down into, as you so adroitly pointed out, into King James times, British times, Britain was the one world empire of that day. They were New World Order Part 2, and King James himself commissioned, wrote, vetted, and approved the Bible that we now have, and the one that most people will say is the only true holy one, or at least a lot of people. And could you imagine? It's the King James Bible, Barbara. Could you imagine the Barack Obama authorized version or the George W. Bush authorized version? Do you think people might have a problem with that?
Well, if they did any research into King James, they should have a great deal to do with, to question. I think what gets me is there are people out there who believe that the Bible, as it stands now, King James Version, is inspired text. And when you consider that a lot of the books, were buried in jars for hundreds, perhaps thousands of years, that some of them were dictated to. Saul had to dictate to Luke because he couldn't see to write, so that you don't know. If you were sitting down and you were saying, I'm going to be inspired and I'm going to write something, and you wrote something and I could see that you wrote it and get the feeling that it was inspired, I'd say, okay, that has the glow, the feeling, the energy of something that came through and was channeled from pure spirit. But the Bible, people who sit and quote chapter and verse, are trying to tell me that all of these men, these fishermen, these lawyers, these tax collectors, these farmers, these, on and on and on, philosophers, these guys who lived in caves and ate fish and bugs, that they were spiritually inspired, and once the last book was written, there is no more inspired text in this world.
And it gets even more, who was that, Alice in Wonderland, curiouser and curiouser? It gets curiouser and curiouser, Barbara, because let's just talk about the New Testament. There's 27 letters. They really were letters written, and they got compiled into what we now call the New Testament. There was 27 of them, and we know exactly when those letters were written, give or take, within a year or two. We know what was written first. We know what was written second. We know what was written 26th. We know what was written 27th. And any rational, logical, impartial, objective person that's putting together a compilation of materials that they know exactly when they were written, especially if they show development of faith and practice of a religion, a political entity, the growth of a nation, anything that we know the historical dates of, we naturally, honestly, objectively put it in order. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 25, 26, 27. Unless you're dealing with the New Testament. It is 100% completely, totally jumbled, in my opinion, intentionally. Because why? Because they don't want you to understand the true message of the New Testament. And if you read it from 1 to 27, you realize it is a battle between the forces loyal to the Christ and his apostles and the forces loyal to Apostle Paul and his new religion. And the way it's written, it's impossible for you to understand that. But I challenge you, if you read the Bible, and you can go on the internet and just Google it, what's first, second, third, fourth, if you read it in chronological order, I guarantee you, you're going to come away with a much, much different view of what happened from AD 30 through AD 100, and you're going to have a much more accurate view, and it's going to cause you to question the things that you've heard in Sunday school and church since you started showing up.
Now, I have a question. So the New Testament is the story of the ministry of the Christ. Now, what is the purpose of the Old Testament? To just sort of, try to tell you how the world began?
Well, the Old Testament is essentially the founding, and you know this, I'm sure, the founding documents of the Jewish faith.
Yep.
And the Christians, those that are believers in the New Testament, like to adopt that as what they call their Old Testament. They like to tie themselves back to that Jewish faith and make it part of their faith and create this thing called Judeo-Christian. Of course, the Jews are very much against that. And Christians there's nothing in that Old Testament that really applies to us. It's a very specific cultural group of writings for, a nomadic tribe of Hebrew people. But I mean, it's nothing that has to do with us. But the real change, Barbara, the real thing is, number one, it came through two great world governments. Number two, it is completely jumbled in its order, so you can't understand what it's really all about. And number three, the great change came with this whole thing. David Icke has his problem, reaction, solution paradigm, where something happens, and then the government everybody clamors for the government to do something about it, and the government moves in and does something about it. Well, the religion has something very similar. It's called the sin, salvation, savior paradigm. We never had this idea that we were born rotten, terrible, awful people, born with original sin, until monotheism raised its ugly head. And now Christianity, Judaism, Islam, the three Abrahamic religions, all teach that we're born with original sin. And if you're born with original sin, you've got to have salvation. And guess what? The church is the only one that's got the Savior. Whereas the Christ taught, you don't have original sin. You've got the spark of divinity within. And he gave you some ways and some truths that if you follow those, you can lead a life that's abundant and even more abundant, and a life that's filled with peace that passes all understanding. So it's in the indoctrination of religion and the sin, salvation, savior paradigm, or the enlightenment of the Christ with the Spirit within, the spark of divinity within, and the growth and development of you as a semi-divine being. So people have a clear choice. I just hope that they will take the time to look at it, register it, and honestly investigate it.
Well, I totally agree with you. The only problem I see is that most people want to be able to go to someone who will forgive them or someone who will protect them. Most people really don't want to take total responsibility for their self and their own evolution.
I hope, that seems to be true. I hope, as you say, it's changing. I hope that we're underestimating people, but all objective evidence points to the fact that most people are lazy. All objective evidence points to the fact that most people just want to be told what to do. And most objective evidence points out that people don't really want to take responsibility for their own spirituality or even their own life. They want to be taken care of, they want to be coddled, and they want to be fed. They want to have somebody do it for them. And I hope that's changing, because it doesn't look like we've got a whole lot of motivated people right now that care enough to actually look behind what Oprah has to say and what the New York Times has to say and get into, or even past what the preacher or priest has to say.
I think that we're coming to a time where people are more and more not necessarily researching the Bible, but getting into their own spirituality and understanding that they do carry within them a grain of the divine, so that they are the master of their own universe to a great extent, that there is a creator, but that creator is not sitting back there pushing buttons so that their life goes in one direction or another. And when you get to that point, when you take responsibility for your own life, then life changes dramatically for you because you are the one in control. And it doesn't mean that you can suddenly become Miss America or win $1 million, but when it comes to how you deal with your fellow man and the richness that you pull into your life because your behavior has been adjusted by your belief system, it is quite amazing, and it does pull tremendous richness into your life on many different levels. So basically, what good is the Bible to us?
Well, that's a great question, and I get that question all the time. And it wasn't 30 years ago, I believed everything in it from Genesis 1:1 to Revelation 22:21. Believed every jot, every tittle, every line. And today, I believe maybe 25 to 30% of it is diamond. The rest of it is dung. It's just the words. I'm along the lines of Thomas Jefferson. He said parts of it have come from a remarkable mind. Most of it has come from the product of most lesser minds. And he said when you start reading it, it's very easy to tell. It's like picking diamonds out of a dunghill, and I agree with him. But today, when I believe 25 to 30% of the Bible is inspired and is the words of the divine, I'm a much better person and a much closer follower of the Christ than I was when I believed 100% of the Bible. It's something about it, Barbara, when you get to the words of the Christ and you get the message of the Christ. I mean, just think about it. If you have the paradigm that you're filled with original sin, that you're a sinner, and even at best you're a sinner saved by grace, it makes it hard for you to really love yourself and trust yourself. And think about this, Barbara. If I think Barbara DeLong and Deb and everybody else is filled with original sin and they're sinners, I'm not really going to trust them. I'm going to keep them at arm's length. I'm looking at them with suspicion. And it's a us versus them paradigm, and it's everybody for himself. But when I realize Jeffrey Daugherty's not filled with original sin, he's got the spark of divinity within, I can begin to love myself. And when I look at you and my neighbors as people that are filled with the spark of divinity, I can say, they have the spark of divinity just like I do. And then this thing that Christ said, love your neighbor as yourself, it all begins to make sense. And Christ said, this is how you'll know that you're my disciples, not because you have only the King James Version, not because you say just the right thing, dress the right way, not because you don't drink, smoke, or chew or hang out with those that do, but because you have love one for another. And I submit to you, you can't really have that love for yourself or for others if you think that you're full of sin, they're full of sin, and you can't trust those rascals. But once you realize you're full of the spark of divinity, they're full of the spark of the divinity, it changes the entire paradigm. And now we can really embrace that idea of love one another, and we can do what those great American philosophers Bill and Ted said, be excellent to each other.
Well, I agree with that. It just seems to me that the Christ consciousness is certainly something that we all can strive for and achieve. And there's nothing that stands in our way except ourselves. You've been
taught, though, Barbara, that you got sin, and you've been taught that you got to have salvation, and you've been taught that there's only this one place, this Christian church has the salvation you need, the Savior you need, then you got to do what they say, when they say, where they say, how they say, and it becomes literally a guilt and fear trap. Oh my gosh, I'm guilty. Oh my gosh, am I going to do enough? And it's fear. It's all about guilt and fear. And anything that's motivated by guilt and fear, in my estimation, is not anything that I really want to be part of.
But how do you weed out the grains of the grains of gold from the grains of sand, because here you're given a book, and the church says this is it. This is the rules. This is what you go by, and you have in there the story of Jesus, and then you have the Christ story as well. How do you separate them? How do you know which is which?
Well, the bottom line, Barbara, is you just have to listen to that still small voice of the Spirit. You just have to get to the place where you know. And when you are listening to the Spirit, it's like President Jefferson said, it is very easy and simple to pick out the diamonds from the dung. But on an actual practical basis, how do we really start going down that path? I think the first thing to do is read the book of John. And why do I say the book of John? Well, John is the disciple that the Christ loved. John, along with probably Mary Magdalene, were the people closest to Christ while he walked here on this earth. And John, Barbara, most people don't realize, because they've got John as the fourth book in the New Testament, people don't realize that John was the last book, with the exception of Revelation, written. John wrote his writings about 60 years after all of the other apostles were dead and buried, and he wrote 35, 40 years after the Apostle Paul was finished writing. So John writes with this great perspective and this great panorama that nobody else has, and John sits back and looks at everything that happened, and he lived through everything that happened from the day that the Christ showed up until the day he started writing around 100 AD, a little earlier than that. So John has this unique perspective, and John sits back and says, okay, all this happened. What's the most important parts? Let me write that down. So that's why I think John is an especially powerful book, and especially good book to start with. And secondly, it's a little bit silly and it's not really totally accurate, but if you get one of these Bibles that has the red letters in it that are supposedly the words of the Christ, and it's not 100% perfect, but if you're reading the book of John and you read those red words that were attributed to the Christ, you'll start to get a real sense of what the true message is. I would ignore Paul completely, and then once you've read everything that John wrote, once you've read all those red letters, you should really start to get a sense of the true feel and the true nature and the true spirit of what the message of the Christ was. And then as you begin to read it all, you really start to see the difference. And take the time and find out. Start with the book of James. That was the first one written. Go through to Revelation. That was the last one written. Once you've read John, once you've read all the red letters, read the books in order, and you can't help but start seeing the glimmering glint and shining virtue of those diamonds, and you won't have any trouble identifying the pungent, smelly, stinky dung.
Well, it is fascinating how Paul created the religion.
He created his own competing, separate religion, and nobody wants to admit that.
Why wasn't it called Paulism?
It should have been. And again, Barbara, if people want to believe in the Apostle Paul's religion, if they want to believe in Paulism, I fully 100% support their right to do so. But I think they ought to be able to have the privilege of having all the information that shows that the religion of the Christ and the religion of Paul are competing religions. In fact, they're mutually exclusive. You can't be one and be the other. And if you choose one over the other, you know what? I give you that right to do so. I just hope, my deepest hope, desire is that you will actually do some research and choose it based upon reasons that you have come to through your own thought, your own prayer, your own contemplation.
Yeah, it is rather fascinating to watch him start to pull together and create a philosophy that was controlling.
Absolutely. And he didn't hide it, Barbara. He was very upfront with it. And again, if you're reading the New Testament books in order, it's very, very blatantly clear. He totally tells you, don't listen to those guys, listen to me.
Well, I think the thing that gets me the most actually is the fact that in my own personal opinion, philosophy, that spirituality should be free. You know, the teaching of it and all of that. And he finds ways. I mean, Paul is clearly out to make a buck. I mean, there's just, you know, he wants to live well, and he wants to have money, and he wants to be paid for his time and his actions. And so when you look at the things that he has said, that he has written about, it's very clear that there is a price tag on a great deal of this stuff. And when you then turn and look at the material that is attributed to the Christ, it's totally free. It's totally, you know, you have free will. You have, you know, you are in control of your own destiny. You know, all you need to do is love one another, and then then life will take on a new vibrancy for you once you are sharing and not judging and not controlling other people.
And it's so liberating when you realize, when you actually see the Christ say, and you actually get into your heart that you're not a dirty, rotten, lousy scoundrel from the very first breath you've ever taken, that you actually have the spark of divinity and great worth in the eyes of the Creator. And when you start looking at yourself in that light and looking at others in that light, it absolutely, positively transforms your entire outlook on life. And I'm convinced that it still has the power and potential to transform the world that we live in if we begin to see ourselves not as people filled with original sin, but people that have rather the spark of divinity within. And the Christ said, the kingdom of God is in you.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think one of the one of the main things that seemed so strange to me, in that Jesus supposedly didn't believe in blood sacrifice, and yet he became a blood sacrifice. That didn't make sense to me.
It's an absolute logical oxymoron. It can't possibly be true. I mean, Jesus showed up on the scene. The first thing he was saying was, listen, no more blood sacrifice. We're bringing this new thing called water baptism. So you don't have to run to the temple anymore, and you don't have to take your very best animal that you've invested so much money into, or you don't have to take a large amount of money and give it to the priest so they can kill this animal so its blood can be applied to your sins. You don't have to do that anymore. All you have to do is go and have yourself baptized in water. You can divorce yourself from the temple. You can divorce yourself from the priesthood. And you can divorce yourself from the idea that you're a sinful, rascally person. And, of course, that completely blew up the religious paradigm. That's why they were so upset with the Christ. And to think that this guy when he walked into that temple, not only was he preaching this, but he walked into that temple on Passover, Barbara, and he stopped, Daniel says he stopped the sacrifice and the oblation. So he stopped the killing of the animals on Passover. That's what Passover was all about. And then he also went and stopped all the selling of the doves and the goats and the animals. That's the oblation. He stopped all of that. Well, and he said, don't do it. And then you're telling me that 3 days later he got himself crucified. He said, yeah, crucify me? Come on, man.
Yeah, that was the money changers too, wasn't it? That
was the money changers. Yeah, they're selling what they.
Yeah, they were taking a percentage for themselves.
Well, what they would do, Barbara, on as a righteous Jew, you had to come to Jerusalem a certain number of times a year. Passover was one of those times. Jerusalem was usually, kind of a small place, less than 100,000 people or so. But on Passover, there was over 1 million people there. So if 3 days before Passover, a calf cost, I don't know what it is. We'll just use our money. If a calf cost $100 3 days before Passover, all of a sudden during Passover, that same calf is $600.
Wow.
So they were jacking up the prices on people. It was usury. It was slavery. It was taking advantage. So that's why Christ also said, no more money. Get that out of here. No more buying animals. No more sacrificing animals. He literally stopped the sacrifice, and he stopped the buying and selling of sacrifice. And to think that was, probably that was early in the week, and to think that same week he offered himself up as a blood sacrifice, it just doesn't make any sense.
No, it doesn't. And it just, that has always bothered me. It's always kind of like, this doesn't make sense to me. But where did original sin originally come from?
Original sin is the brainchild of monotheism. There's some debate whether it was Zoroastrianism or Judaism, which one came first. They're within, historically speaking, they're probably within a couple hundred years, which is a blink of the eye, historically speaking. But it was monotheistic religion that came up with the idea of original sin. So it was born within Zoroastrianism or Judaism, got passed into Christianity, got passed into Islam, and now the whole West and much of the Middle East as well is now permeated with this idea of original sin, which is brand new. It's a Johnny-come-lately, religiously and culturally speaking, but yet it's swept the globe with almost an exclusive covering, and it's so sad, and it really is tragic. If we could just become people of perspective and realize, hey, wait a minute, this thing is brand new, let's take another look at it, we'd realize that it's a flawed, failed argument, and especially if we take into consideration the words of the Christ who made it his business to go against that and say, no, forget original sin, you've got the spark of divinity within. It's a complete total transformation and a complete different change in paradigm and mindset between those two things.
Yeah, it never made sense to me. It just, you look at a baby and you say, how can this innocent have sin? It doesn't make sense.
Well, it makes sense in this sense, Barbara. If you're trying to come up with a plan that is going to make every single person beholden to you, then it makes perfect sense. Because if you're the church that has the only Savior, there's only one Savior, if you're the one that has the one Savior, if you can make everybody think that they're in need of salvation, if you can make everybody believe that they're sinners, then guess what? Sooner or later, they've got to come to you to get to your Savior, to get the salvation, to get rid of their sin, or else they're going to a really, really bad, painful, nasty, burning, horrible place. So if you're trying to set up a control system, and if you're trying to set up a perpetual money-making machine, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, hellfire and damnation it can really be made to look horrifying.
I remember when I was a preacher, I used to preach hell so hot, Barbara, that you would feel the bottom of your feet burning through the floor.
I can believe it. I
feel so bad about that.
Well, you probably turned some people away from some of their sins. Who knows? But you haven't been struck by lightning, Jeffrey, so you must have done something right.
Let's hope so.
I mean, I would not stand next to you. I'm pretty sure that a lightning bolt is not going to come and get you. But, I am so concerned about this Bible stuff because people today, it's like it's the final word. I know people that literally can chapter and verse you. And, there is so much that is in the Bible. There's so much that is beautiful. Actually, the only place that I think death is ever described is beautiful, and I don't think anybody ever talks about it from the pulpit. And it's, Psalm 90, verse 10, it talks about how the days of your life are long and you toil hard. I'm paraphrasing here. And you toil hard, and if you're lucky, you live to be 70 or maybe 80 years old, and then you die. And the next words, and then you fly away. I mean, it's so beautiful, and in every Bible that I've looked at, no matter what version it is, it tells you that your spirit flies away, that there is, you let go of the mortal coil and you fly away, that there is a release, there is a beauty, that you fly. And that's never talked of. That bothers me often.
I couldn't agree with you more, and that's exactly right, because we're not trying to create something. If you're in the Christian realms, whether it's Roman Catholicism or Roman Protestantism, you're not trying to create a situation of peace and security and love and unconditional love. You're trying to create, again, that sinner, salvation, savior paradigm, because that keeps people there and it keeps people paying. I mean, I hate to say it, that I really don't hate to say it, I'm just being polite, but that really is the facts. Those really are the facts of the matter.
Well, the churches have become corporations. And to me, they aren't serving the way they're supposed to.
Everyone talks about, you hear preachers all the time saying, oh, we've got to have separation of church and state. And you hear politicians saying, we've got to have separation of church and state. And if they really, really believe that, then I would challenge the churches, if they really believe in the separation of church and state, I would challenge the churches to surrender their 501c3 designation. And if the politicians really believe in the separation of church and state, I would challenge them to revoke the 501c3 designation and let the churches pay their taxes. Let there be true separation between church and state if we really believe in that as a foundational truth.
Well, I have, I served in the church for 5 years. And I think one of the things that I became disenchanted with was that the church as an organization did nothing for the community. And, there were no soup kitchens. There were no drives for the poor. There were no, and in most communities, I see the same thing. They have overseas missionaries, but they don't do anything with the community that they're involved with. And to me, that's what the church is for.
That's true. And, unfortunately, that is a characteristic of, most large organizations, whether you're talking about the Red Cross or UNICEF or a church. When you give $1, 95%, 95 pennies out of that dollar, of those 100 pennies that make up $1, 90 to 95 of them are going somewhere to pay somebody and to pay bureaucracy. And even if you're giving $1 in good faith, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 cents of it actually goes to what you want it to go to. I mean, with this thing with Las Vegas, people wanting to give money, 90% of it is going to be ate up paying some bureaucrat somewhere to push around some paper. And it's really, really sad that religion is no better than the rest of these organizations that, make no pretension to be religious.
Yeah, I think we are coming to a time where people's own personal internal spiritual belief system is going to be their guidance, as opposed to an organization that tells them what they have to do and how they have to do it. I am so taken with people who are going independent, so to speak, who have their own philosophy. They walk their talk. And that to me is a more spiritual person than someone who sits in a pew every Sunday and makes a big deal, a showy thing of putting, a $50 or $100 bill into the collection plate. That to me is not being spiritual. That's being part of the system and trying to buy your way into a place that everybody goes to anyhow.
No, I agree with you 100%. And sadly, most people are doing that because they've been so conditioned now for, 2,000 years. And, just in our own lives, ever since we've been born, we're so conditioned that, this is the church we go to. Christianity is the only way. Our God's the only God. And we have this perception as people that it's always been that way. But it's only been this way for 2,000 years. For 48,000 years, this was unheard of.
Yeah, and it's sort of like, why not go back to paganism? Why not talk to the nature spirits? And there, at least, if you're going to do something, you fertilize a plant. You don't give somebody money. And but whoops, we'll be back. So Jeffrey, we have been through sort of destroying the Bible slightly, just a little bit, but with this second half, I kind of want to go into the fact that We're talking about a renaissance in consciousness, an awakening of a spiritual part of ourselves that most of us have felt but not really reached for and embraced, that has always been there and is available to us. How do people get to that spot inside of them? I mean, intellectually, we can do a lot of talking, and we can tell them, well, it's there, you just have to reach for it. How do they reach for it?
Well, the first step, unfortunately, because of where we are and how long we've been, under this cloud and this system of indoctrination, it's like Mark Twain said, it's much easier to fool someone than it is to convince them that they've been fooled. But unfortunately, we have to keep trying. And the first step, very many times, to learning truth is you have to unlearn error. And believe it or not, I never thought I'd hear myself say this, but sometimes for people that have been into, places of heavy indoctrination religiously, sometimes there almost has to be this requisite stay in a period of atheism or agnosticism for a little while before they can get themselves kind of cleared out to be able to understand that they can move on to true spirituality. Because a lot of times people, I think, say, all right, I'm through with this. They're in the church, they're in religion, I'm done with God. Mm-hmm. And they leave thinking, I'm done with God. And then after a little while, they start to realize, well, you know what? Maybe it's not God I'm done with, it's religion I'm done with, it's human religion I'm done with. And once they can make that break and realize, it's not God, it's men that act and women that act and speak in the name of God that are the problem. And when you start making a transition from a religion to a relationship with the divine, that's when things really start to change. But I think the thing that most people have to do, and I have T-shirts that say this because it's so foundational to me, you have to realize that you're divine, you're sovereign, and you're free. And until you make that break, you really can't even begin to start up down a spiritual path because you're still into a cage. I mean, there's this movie called Instinct that starred Anthony Hopkins and Cuba Gooding Jr. Long story short, Anthony Hopkins worked with gorillas, and there's this big, strong, powerful gorilla in this cage. And it's just Anthony Hopkins and Cuba Gooding Jr. in this room. And Anthony Hopkins opens the door to this cage, and Cuba Gooding's, what are you doing? He's going to kill us. And that gorilla, big, strong, powerful gorilla, has been in that cage for so long, Barbara, that he cowers in the corner, and he won't walk out of that cage. Freedom is 20 feet away, but he's so beaten down and so controlled and so used to be in a cage that he won't walk out. And unfortunately, that's where a lot of us are. And until we realize the door's open, freedom's 20 feet away, and until we take our own responsibility to stand up and walk out of that cage, that's when life can begin again for us.
Yeah, it's a very exciting time. It's one of those aha moments, one of those mountaintop moments when you do begin to see and realize that you have more control than you thought, that it's, and I'm not going to call any preacher a liar, because I do believe most people who are in the pulpit believe every word they say. And I just don't go along with what they preach, that's all. So, but it's if religion as it is portrayed right now is not fulfilling you spiritually speaking, it's okay to look for something else. It's okay to find a different route to that consciousness inside of you. So, everybody has said for God, I don't, as many years as I can remember, that you hold all the answers, that you have the answers within you, that you don't have to go looking outside of yourself for the answers because they're all inside of you. And that's true. And it feels to me as though we are coming to a time where people, and for everybody, it's a different way to get there. There is no one way. There is no my way or the highway. Everyone has their own individual way of getting to that spark of the infinite they carry within them. And it can be just letting go and allowing yourself to listen to the whispers that Spirit sends to you, the subtleties that Spirit gives you in your dreams, to pay attention to those things that happen to you that look like coincidences but aren't. And, there are many ways that you can sort of open the channels so that the Spirit can filter into your physical reality and help to manifest within your reality. It's a very gentle process, and it doesn't happen overnight. But if you're open to it, if you're seeking it, it's there for you.
I agree with you 100%. I think that's absolutely right. And I think that this platform that you're on is a very good example of this paradigm that we're in. I mean, I listen to the commercials, and it's Revolution Radio, Freedom Slips Radio. Obviously, there's a lot of people that tune into this platform, and I mean, talk radio, truther movement, alternative media, whatever you want to call it, is one of the fastest growing segments of the media out there right now. And there's so many people that believe that, boy, you know what? It's only been 200 years in this country, but our government isn't what our founding fathers meant for it to be. The institutions that run our lives and our government aren't what they used to be, and we're being hoodwinked and we're being taken advantage of. And we need to investigate our government. We need to investigate all of our political systems and our social systems. We need to get back to what our founding fathers wanted us to do and be. And I salute that. I support that. I'm 100% for that. But the curious thing is, Barbara, even within the so-called truther movement, alternative media, whatever you want to call it, when somebody like me comes along and says, you know what, you're exactly right. We're not doing what the founding fathers said. You're exactly right. We need to investigate everything from A to Z. You're exactly right. We need to get back to what the founding fathers posed. But when you come along and say, wait a minute, maybe we should get back to what the founder of our religion proposed. Maybe we should investigate with the same vigor that we investigate our governmental agencies, investigate our religious and spiritual agencies to make sure that we're still really doing what the founding fathers and mothers of our religion told us to do. And we might find out that we're just as far off the religious path of the founding fathers as we are off the political path of the founding fathers. And it really bothers me that a lot of people within the truther movement don't have the tenacity or the guts or the courage or whatever it takes to apply the same investigative techniques they do towards government, also towards religion, when really government and religion is like Republican and Democrat. They're two wings on the same bird, and they're really in cahoots. And if we would just apply the same great investigative, tenacious efforts towards the other that we applied to the one, our world would change overnight.
Oh, absolutely. But when you get right down to it, the founding fathers were deists. They weren't Christians. They weren't doing this for a religious purpose at all. So that religion didn't have anything to do with it. So this country, was not a Judeo-Christian organization. Even from the very beginning, it was an experiment. And
right, but it was, based on personal liberty and freedom. That would be my point.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Of course, only for some, not for all. But now, come
in
on.
General.
They only gave... Okay. Yeah. But you're absolutely right. I think that this is a time of great awakening. I have for years said, we're not in an enlightened culture at all. We're in the dark ages, and we're just starting to come out of the dark ages. And by doing that, we are beginning to see where the cracks are in the foundation, and that the foundation isn't going to hold, whether it's government or religion. The cracks are there. It's not going to hold. The structures that are built upon foundations that are not structurally strong are going to fall apart, and we are going to be taken back to our source. We're going to be taken back to the fundamentals. And I think one of the things that is so exciting in seeing all of this happening with religious stuff, I get people who come to me for counselings that are priests and nuns. And it's kind of like, well, where is the Creator in your life? And, they kind of give me blank stares. There are people that are in service of a religion that have lost their fundamentals. And we're finding that more and more every day. And it feels to me as though people like you and like me and like a lot of us are out there saying, hey, did you ever think about this? Did you ever question this? Did you ever look at this and think, maybe there's something else here? Because an organized religion is wonderful for people to get together and share burdens and share helping their community and share in lots of different ways, but not because they are commanded to, because they want to. And I think we've gotten into a very selfish system. It's me, and I want my toys, I want my this, I want my that, and then I'll give money to wherever. I know my son and daughter-in-law are fundamental Christians, and I mean, they study hard and they do the best they can to help others, and yet they are controlled and they are basically told how to live their life. Now, they may have lived their life this way anyhow, but the fact that it is ordained is just so sad. And you sit back and you just wonder, if you wake up and you realize that so much of what you've been studying and teaching and preaching it won't hold water.
Right.
It has to be so disillusioning when you decided to turn around and walk away. That must have been a moment of amazing, holy mackerel. I have taken a sidetrack here that isn't appropriate.
It was very scary. And, we talked about Thomas Jefferson before, and he said a little revolution now and again is a good thing. And I think that applies not only politically, but it applies religiously as well. And, I wish I could say that, Barbara, one day I realized it was wrong, and I got up and I marched out of there with firm conviction and a stiff upper lip and my head held high. That's not exactly the way it happened. I knew that I should leave probably at least 5, maybe 10 years before I did. It took me a long time to walk away. I mean, you got to remember, I was a full-time minister. I was getting paid by the church. I was living in a house provided by the church. I had been trained by the church. I had no other skills. My wife was, big time in the church. I had 3 kids, and it took me longer than it should have. I'll be the first to admit it. If I'd have acted with more integrity, I would have left sooner. But it is a scary thing to realize that which you have built your life upon is shifting sand. People hear me, and I'm very boisterous sometimes and very, blustery. But if people would just take a second and realize that I was where all of them are, and I'm not asking anybody to do anything that I haven't done. And maybe that's why I'm so strong with it, because I'm like, hey, look, I did it. What's wrong with you? And I know that I can't, project my place on other people, but I've been there and I've done that. And I know what you're going through. I know what happens. That's why, people ask me, Jeff, why are you so patient with people on your YouTube channel? And we've got about 8,000 followers now. And I try to answer every single comment. But a lot of them are slamming me, and people say, just delete them. And I try to actually work with people as much as I can, because I know that I was those people, 25, 30 years ago. So, when they go to Christian Whistleblower or Jeffrey Daugherty YouTube and they blast me, I try to remember that maybe this is a person who's afraid their foundation has fallen apart and they're just lashing out. And if I can keep them around long enough, it's like having the only lifeboat in the middle, with a sinking ship. If I can keep them in the lifeboat, they got a chance to stay alive.
Well, the fact that they're going and listening and then blasting you means that they have listened to you. And once you plant that seed, it grows. And it's just amazing. Sometimes it takes a decade for reality to come full circle, and you go, wow. Yeah, Yeah, he was right.
That's true. Although
I
sometimes I think they look at the title and just blast me without even listening to the show.
once I think energetically, once they hit your YouTube or listen to any of your shows, that that old thing that 45 seconds staring at a screen puts you in a mild hypnotic state.
I've never heard that. That's interesting.
45 seconds of watching television or a movie or staring any place, within 45 seconds, you are in alpha.
Well, I'm very much encouraged. Thank you, Barbara. You helped me out.
So you've got people in a slight hypnotic state, even though they're looking at chat room scrolling or anything like that. They are in a level of consciousness where they are subliminally getting a message that you're sending, whether or not they are even understanding it or grasping it at that moment in time. The message is delivered, and
good point.
It's really the coolest thing. And when you watch TV and you stare at the commercials and you can almost say the commercial verbatim, it's implanted within your consciousness. This is not the kind of garbage you want, but that's what happens. The people who do TV and everything, commercials are always more than 45 seconds for that very reason.
That's a great point. I
did want to touch on one other area which has always fascinated me, and you do go into, and that's the UFO, ET, alien agenda that is in the New Testament. Because it is definitely there. I know Patrick, my late husband, wrote books on it. I mean, the UFOs are clearly there in the Bible, and he listed them all. It was just phenomenal. And, it's now, have they been planted there? Are they genuinely there? Where did they come from?
Well, I'm holding in my hand right now The Greatest Deception, the Bible UFO Connection by Patrick Cook, and I've been reading through it. And yes, he has a lot of great information in there. It's a very studious work. And, I've written a book on that too. It's actually in Final Message of the Last Apostle. And I think that it's undeniable. You've touched on an undeniable truth that there is an undeniable, intentional UFO, ET, and alien agenda that runs throughout the New Testament. And as crazy as that is sounding to people, it's even crazier, back to curiouser and curiouser again, because not only is there a UFO, ET, alien agenda in the New Testament, but it is exclusively centered around the major events in the life of Jesus. And how crazy is that, Barbara?
That's very crazy.
It's very crazy.
but it feels you begin to wonder, okay, so these were people writing about their own time. So I don't think they were putting these things in just for sheer shock value. I mean, some of them had to actually occur.
I agree. I think that they probably did see some of these things, or at least they were, told about them, or it was planted into their minds, or whatever. But the thing we have to realize is that people are these are first century people looking at stuff they have no way to be able to explain, so they're putting it in first century terms. But we have to be studious enough to look at them through 21st century eyes, and with the understanding that we have now and not the understanding that they have then. And my conclusion is that there is a group out there, or an entity out there, that wants humanity to believe that we are sired by UFOs, aliens. They want us to believe that our God is a UFO or an ET or an alien. They want us to believe that our quote-unquote savior is an ET or an alien. And they're setting up, I believe, this great, and John wrote about this, in my opinion, they're setting up this great end-time, and false flag is a term we use, this great end-time deception of a alien savior God, or a God coming back in alliance with aliens, coming back to save us, coming back to take over. And they're setting up this entire narrative to get us to buy into the idea that ETs have created us, and that ETs can come down and have physical relations and sexual relations with us anytime they want, and that these ETs are so powerful and that we're really their children, and they're setting it up for us to be willing to receive them as either saviors or as facilitators of our Savior.
But, I could understand it if you were talking about today. But we're talking about 2,000 years ago or 1,000 years ago. And to have them talking about, when Constantine, decided he wanted to become a Christian, it's because he saw flying shields in the sky, which were obviously ETs. Hard to not
march with a cross and this sign conquer.
Yeah, that just is. It's just so obvious that you can't negate that. But it's in the Old Testament too, because when Moses took everybody into the desert, they had the pillar of light, and manna was dropped down from the heavens. And in the Bible, if you go to the Bible and you look at the translation, the origin of the word heaven, it comes down to heaven meant sky. So manna was falling from the sky, not from the heavens. It was falling from the sky. And it had to be a saucer of some sort at the crucifixion. Right. Something blacked out the sun for 3 hours. And it wasn't an eclipse. So what would be big enough to black out the sun? Again, a disk, a saucer of some sort.
Absolutely.
So who is it that is planting the UFO stuff? Was that Paul, or was that somebody else? Who is the one that is writing the most about the ET agenda?
Well, in my, after my, 100,000 hours plus studying the Bible and 36 years of evaluating it, I think it's the being that in the Old Testament is called the Lord. I think that's the being that is kind of directing this whole agenda. I think he's the one that is laying this groundwork for this type. And he's the one that started this whole thing, way back at the beginning, whether it's 6,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, whenever it all started. And he has, he's the hidden hand throughout time as far as the scriptures go. And he's been there to consistently seed this information, whether he's giving the people that write it down, delusions, or whether he's creating optical, visual, illusions for them to see, whether they're mind controlled, whether he's just dictating to them, or whether he would want us to believe that he is in cahoots with some type of extraterrestrial power. And I think it's all a part of a deception. I think it's all part of a carefully crafted plan. In my estimation, if it ever does happen, and I think we can stop it by getting the information out about it, but if it ever does happen, I'm convinced it will be, a holographic type of a situation where it won't really be true, it won't really be happening. But I've seen Elvis perform in Las Vegas, Barbara, and he's been dead for 40 years. And I've seen Michael Jackson perform in Vegas, and he's been dead for how many years? And you would swear that it's really them. I've seen whales jump out of the middle of a basketball court, and it looks like they're really there. So the technology is in place, and I think it's it's part of the fear agenda, it's part of the control agenda. But I truly believe that he's been setting up all these years the opportunity to leverage the lore and the awe and the fear associated with extraterrestrials to manifest that in his own, part of his own plan to come back and try to take over the earth and set himself up as absolute, complete ruler, not just religious ruler, but actual, complete physical rulership of the planet.
Well, now that would go with the Jesus theory that Jesus is going to return with an army behind him.
Absolutely, 100%.
And I kind of, I can't see it. but some people do believe that. Now, but when you get to the separation between the Jesus story and then the Christ who was actually here, I found fascinating the fact that, first of all, that the Christ was not crucified, did not die and come back. He just didn't die. So where did the Christ go?
That's a great question. I personally think that, he said that he had other sheep that weren't of this fold, and I think he basically told him, look, I've got other people to talk to, I've got other places to go, I got other people to see. Did he go to India? Did he go to Egypt? Did he go to the Americas? I mean, all of these traditions have, did he go to the Central America? Did he go to the islands? All of these traditions have elements of, what we would call the Christ message in them. And he clearly said that he was going to talk to other people. And the Bible shows us that after the crucifixion, after the resurrection, the apostles of the Christ had no idea that there was going to be any resurrection, because he didn't talk to them about that. He didn't talk to them about dying. He just left. So I'm convinced that he went and talked to other people and taught other people, and that I don't know if he's anywhere today. I haven't heard tell of him, and I think it'd be hard for him to hide himself, but I think that he very likely went and talked to some other people, other places, or it's possible he just went back to the abode of the Elohim, wherever that is, Barbara.
Well, I know that Nicholas Roerich, the Russian painter, in his travels in Tibet, he visited a monastery, and the monastery said that they had records of Jesus or the Christ, probably the Christ, visiting. And they pulled the records out and showed them to him, and to my memory, it was after supposedly he was crucified.
No, I absolutely believe that. That I have no problem whatsoever believing that happened.
And there is a book out there called something like He Walked the Ley Lines, so that there are stories.
Oh, interesting.
There are stories of the Christ in this country, walking the ley lines, and that part of the power he had, he drew power from the ley lines, I think basically is what they were saying. Fascinating.
And, people wonder, well, how could he possibly, the transportation wasn't good enough? But if you look, even in the Bible, it talks about there's a scene of Christ disappearing from one place and showing up about 100 miles away within a few minutes. And, there wasn't a super donkey, a turbo donkey or anything. He was able, obviously, to travel, as a spiritual being or translocate or whatever that's called. So he wouldn't have any trouble getting to Tibet or walk the ley lines or anywhere else that he wanted to go. So I completely believe he did that.
I mean, it's just like the Buddha. He was on one side of the river at one moment, and they didn't have a way to cross it. And the next thing, everybody knew he was on the other side of the river. So that energy, that ability to teleport, to go from one place to another, is
teleport,
something.
That's the word I was looking for.
I mean, we have the DNA for that. We only use. We only use, a very small portion of the DNA that we have within our body. There are DNA features that are turned off that would, if turned on, allow us to regenerate a limb if it came off. I mean, there are, I think, are they salamanders or whatever? But if their tail comes off, they actually grow another one.
Absolutely.
So that, we have the ability to do so much of this stuff. And, you don't ever talk about the passing of the Christ. And so, you are left to wonder, where did he go and what did he do? And all right, there may have been, he may have gone to other galaxies, to other planets, to other whatever as well, but there are so many stories of him, and some of the stories, especially with the Incas or the Aztecs, I can't remember which, but Quetzalcoatl,
right.
was a white man with a beard. So, was that the Christ in another time frame? I mean, I would imagine he could hopscotch through time to a certain degree, but if he
no problem.
But if he turned up today, I mean, the last time he was here, he wasn't received that well by a lot of people.
Yeah, he'd wind up in a rubber room if he came today. But, John himself said, listen, guys, if all the things that the Christ did were to be written down, not all the books in the world could contain them. Of course, that's a little hyperbole, but he's telling us, look, there's a lot of stuff that this dude did that you don't know about.
Well, it does make you wonder then, the story of the wedding at Cana. Now, was that Jesus or was that the Christ?
Are you asking my opinion?
Yeah.
I would say that wasn't the Christ. I think that was probably added in. It's and I know there's a lot of good scholarship on it, and a lot of people have spent a lot of great time on it. But I don't think that the Christ was married and hung around, went to England and stuff, and was married to Mary Magdalene and had kids and stuff. I think he was more likely going off to the Americas, going off to Central America, going off to Tibet. That's just my personal opinion, though.
Well, I think one of the things that is bothering to a degree is in all of the stuff in the Bible. One of his apostles, one of his disciples was Mary, and yet there's so little said about her.
Well, that's because this rather trite phrase we like to throw around, and we don't really realize the implications of it. History is written by the victors, and the victors in this case are very misogynistic, very anti-feminine, and there's been great effort from the beginning of Christianity that's continuing right up until now to suppress the divine feminine, to suppress the role of the female, and to suppress the roles, of what Mary Magdalene meant to Christ. And I mean, Paul himself says women shouldn't speak in church, they shouldn't have authority over men. They have to have men as a sexual covering, as they'll be having sex with all kinds of angels. It's Christianity. We don't like to talk about it. You're not going to hear people preaching about it. But Christianity is a very much anti-woman religion, and I think it's anti-woman because they don't want females to be empowered. They don't want the spirit of the sacred feminine to come in, because that gives us balance. That gives us a realization that it's not all a man's world, and that will actually, as we start getting into our feminine spirituality, that's going to open up a lot of truth and reality to us. And pretty soon, it really gets hard to control people who are getting enlightened. It's a lot easier to control indoctrinated folks, Barbara, than it is to control enlightened ones.
Well, yeah, because in my opinion, if we're reaching for the spirituality to the spirit within us, that spirit within us is androgynous. And so there is a balance of male-female energy in it.
Absolutely, 100% true.
So to negate out the feminine is to cut in half the intensity and the wisdom that you have available to you if you're only looking for the masculine side of it. And our spirits do not have a sex. They are residing in, at this particular point in time, an avatar that has a male or female gender, but the spirit itself does not have a sexuality.
It's the ultimate divide and conquer, isn't it?
Well, it is, and I'm not saying that it should be more strongly feminine. I'm saying it should be balanced. There should be
absolutely
a wonderful balance here, and oftentimes when this pendulum swings, it goes too far one direction and then it goes too far the other direction. It's a matter of trying to come into the center and have a full balance of both aspects, because without that full balance, you don't have the richness of the spirit within you.
And that's a great point. And I really believe that this full solar eclipse that we had back in August was the end of the correction of Sophia. And I do believe that the fullness of the sacred feminine, what I call the first Christ, I think that the first Christ manifested within Lilith, who was Adam's first wife, and because and that was Sophia manifesting. That's written in the Nag Hammadi scriptures, and there's an allusion to it in the book of Genesis as well. But I think that, she sublimated herself because she did create this guy called Yaldabaoth, who I believe it's pretty clear that he's the Lord, and she did it without the consort, without the consent of her her male cohort. She didn't do it in league with him, so it was unbalanced. And he's the one that talked us into entrapping ourselves in these bodies, and she felt it imperative that she come into human form to at least instill somewhere within our DNA or within our minds that we are not this body. We're actually much more than this. We're a spirit, having a body experience or trapped in a body. But I think with that solar eclipse, that the Sophia has risen, that the time of Sophia's correction is over, and that for like never before, at least in the past couple thousand, 5, 6, 10,000 years, however long it's been, we now have a greater access to the fullness of the sacred feminine and the fullness of the sacred masculine. And if you think about the eclipse, that's exactly what you saw. You saw the masculine sun and the feminine moon merged together. And I was there. I drove 12 hours to get to totality, and I felt that spiritual explosion. I felt that full masculine and full feminine. And I think that there's an especial time now between the one time that one happened in here in 2017. The next one comes in 2024. And I think this 7 years is a special, anointed, fantastic, unique opportunity for us to move up and to move on and to move into our fullness of spirituality. And I have a sneaky feeling, the Christians want to tell us it's, the rapture happened on the September 23rd and it's 7 years of tribulation. No, I think it's 7 years of jubilation, Barbara, and it's a great time for us to manifest and to grow and develop. But I have a sneaky feeling that it may not last past that second solar eclipse in the U.S. in 2024, and that we really should have a sense of urgency, and that we really should take advantage of this unique opportunity of the next 7 years to not come way over into the feminine side because we've been over in the masculine side, but like you said so perfectly, to find ourselves and develop a perfect balance between masculine and feminine. And one of the things I'm most proud of, and it sounds silly to most people, but on my YouTube channel, I've got about 8,000 subscribers now, and we got about 1 million views a month. And if you look at my statistics, Barbara, it's 51% male, 49% female, and I am just so proud and flabbergasted that that's the case.
Oh, that's amazing.
It really is. It's truly remarkable.
No, it's comforting to know that usually when there has to be a major shift, there's a rebellion of some sort. And I don't want to see a rebellion. I want to see an awakening, because that to me is so much more exciting. It doesn't mean that suddenly women are going to grow mustaches and slap people around.
Let's hope not.
Oh,
I'm still single.
Please. But it does mean that not feeling less. What society has done to women is unfortunately over the last several hundred years, especially, has made them, almost. It's almost like it's an archetype that's been, just hammered into them that they are less than the male.
Absolutely.
And we're coming to a time where women are saying, no, I am a woman, hear me roar.
Exactly.
But I want it gently, in my opinion, it should be gently done. It should be not a matter of, when Patrick and I got together, he was very into the paranormal and he had a photographic memory. He was a biblical theologian. He really knew his stuff. And he wrote well. And when, and of course, I'm more of the metaphysically oriented, more of the spiritually oriented. And it doesn't mean one is better than the other. It just means that together they're an amazing mix.
Absolutely. And
he wrote something and he sent it to me, and I said, well, what do you want me to do? Spell check it or what? And he said, no, just what do you think? And I said, well, can I make suggestions? And he said, Sure. And he told me later that he really thought it was perfect and that I was just being silly. And so I put the spiritual and the metaphysical into it. I didn't change what he said. I just softened it into a more spiritual flow. And when I sent it to him, he was absolutely speechless. He said, "How did you do this?" And I said, "I just put the spiritual metaphysical into it. All you had was the scientific paranormal, this is it." And I softened it a little bit. And from that moment on, he never wrote anything alone, nor did I.
That's amazing. What a great story.
Because it was the combination of the two. It wasn't one overshadowing the other. And when we did the documentary, Secrets of the Stones, he and I talked about what we wanted to say, and then I wrote it. But, I had his input first, and then I took his input and I put it into more spiritually oriented text and flow and stuff like that. And it worked, and it's a magical documentary. But so I think most people should understand that there is, if you blend the two facets together, you come up with a richness that is amazing. If you stop competing and start cooperating, you have magic happening.
Absolutely. And, when I see this, and I'm looking at it right now, 51% male, 49% female in my views, it almost makes me feel like I might be doing something right every now and then.
Well, I'm sure you are. You have that many people following what you're saying. You definitely are doing something right for sure. And I think sometimes we want so badly to see the change we feel is happening that it's kind of cool. And I'm positive that every now and then you have a revelation or an epiphany where you have that aha moment when it's like, I made a difference. Somebody caught it. Somebody paid attention. Somebody caught on to what I was saying.
You do. I do have those from time to time. And somebody said, it's a sorry dog that won't wag his own tail every now and then. So, every now and then you have to pat yourself on the back and say, you know what, I did all right there.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think too, it's in this field, you do what you believe in, and you have faith that you're doing the right thing. And every now and then you get a reward that says, you get a cookie, you get a breadcrumb, you're going the right direction. And it is a very exciting thing. It's not that often, I might add, but every now and then there is something that says, wow, you really did a good job on this. And often it comes just from out of the blue. It's nothing that, it's not where you would like it. It's not where you expect it. But it's where it comes when it's most important to give you that boost, to push you on forward and to go into new directions. And I think that what's happening with your ministry and whatever my ministry happens to be is that there are new doors opening, so that there are new venues that are becoming available to us. And because of that, I basically, every time a new venue opens, my philosophy is, well, I've made a fool of myself in front of more people than this. This is not a bad idea. And you kind of just blunder ahead. I know that I was in Blog Talk for a long time, and then the Freedom Slips people invited me to be a part of their programming, and it expanded my audience tremendously. And it is so exciting to see the changes that have come in the kind of interviews that I'm able to do now. So, you get those subtleties that are saying, yeah, keep going. This is the right pathway. And I know you're obviously getting that kind of a boost from the shows that you're doing, because you have a lot of people paying attention to what you're saying. But the responsibility must be phenomenal on making sure you say the right thing in the right way.
Well, you do have that sense of responsibility, and as hard as it is for some people to believe, I have really made an effort to try to, maybe at least think about what I say before it comes flying out of my mouth. I really do try to take a second to think, okay, should I say this that way? And to try to I even softened, the name of my channel a little bit, and I've kind of gone a little bit of a different direction there because, one of my buddies was saying, why do you want to upset everybody and run them off before they've even had a chance to listen? So I am trying to be a little bit kinder, a little bit gentler, a little bit more, I guess, touchy-feely, but, still be true to who I am. So, you don't have to be mean and ornery and cantankerous. You can use, like my granddaddy used to say, honey catches more flies than vinegar, and it's still true today.
It is, but every now and then I know that when I'm doing something or speaking with people, I will kind of feel as though there's something else there that is causing me to speak louder, not louder, but stuff comes out of my mouth before I've actually filtered it. And, in those moments, I realize that I got the information from somewhere and I don't know who it was. And then it's kind of like I have to back up a little bit and kind of not soften it, but kind of to, make sure that I say it in another way as well, so that people understand that what came out was something that had to come out, but it wasn't possibly the way I would have normally said it. And I in listening to a lot of your shows, I can see there are moments when you just get going and something comes out that possibly you would have phrased differently if you'd had a chance to think about it, but you said it in a way that probably hit or targeted someone that it was really important they hear it. And you just have to trust that when those things happen, that there's a reason that Spirit is steering you in that direction.
You have to be, above all things, you have to be authentic. If you're not authentic, you might as well start doing something else.
Well, this is true. This is true. But the cool thing about this field is that it is so exciting, that it keeps you vital and vibrant and excited about life and what's coming next.
Oh, it really does. It really does.
So what is coming next for you? Obviously other books, but what else is coming next?
Well, other books, obviously are coming next. I really would like to get out and do more speaking at, more conferences and things of that nature, but I seem to be a bit of a tough pill to swallow, so there's not exactly people falling over me to do that. But, we're doing a lot of, crazy stuff, a lot of stuff that people think is really weird. And, right now, if you want to talk about nutty, right now I was reading the parable of the tenants in the vineyard, and it talks about how the Elohim put this vineyard and put men in it, and that this wicked husbandman came in and started oppressing everybody, and they tried to work with this husbandman, and finally they decided that it was time for the people in the vineyard to evict this husbandman and get somebody else to run the vineyard. And I am researching right now and looking at and thinking about if that's not exactly what the Elohim want us to do. And you go back to Genesis, and it says that they put us in an arena to watch what we would do. And, people say, well, why does God allow pain? Why does God allow suffering? Why won't the Elohim do anything about it? Well, what if, Barbara, they're waiting for us to grow up and do something about it? So the thing I'm on now is this idea of, the person we call the Lord literally went through the Hebrews. They went and they stole everybody else's God. They said, you can't talk about these gods anymore. You can't mention their names anymore. They cut down their groves. They cut down their poles. They cut down their idols. They destroyed all these other gods. So now all these other gods are gone. With Rome, they did the same thing. They went out and said, you can't worship these gods. You can only worship the Lord. The kingdom of Britain, Great Britain, did the same thing, Christianized all the pagans. So here's all these gods whose names aren't mentioned anymore, who aren't getting any worship anymore, who've been, retired to the ash bin of history, so to speak. So I'm thinking, and here's this Lord run amok, doing bad things, sponsoring bad people, creating, the Lord is in business to do two things, to create bloodshed to get power and to create prayers to get power. And what better way to do it than creating bloodshed and prayers from both sides? So what if we decided to contact some of these other gods that he has stolen the worship from, in the praise from and said, hey, how would you guys like to work together? Go talk to this guy who's messing up the vineyard and say, hey, look, enough's enough. Time for you to either change your ways or vacate the premises. And, the Bible says 1,000 years is like a day to a God. So it's only been a couple weeks to them at most, but they might be getting tired of it. And I'm really seriously thinking that we can appeal to some of these gods that he has stolen the worship and praise from and say, hey, look, let's work together. We're trying to learn to be gods. You're already gods. Let's work together. Let's evict this guy, let's reform him, or let's evict him and let's give this vineyard to people that are better suited to run it.
Interesting.
How's that for crazy?
Well, it's interesting. I can see you doing it. I also can see you doing documentaries.
You're not the first person that's mentioned that to me. That's a great idea.
And you're halfway there with what you're doing with your radio show. So your YouTube stuff, and I can see you doing videos on the different topics with different graphics and different. I can see you doing that. I think that would be exciting.
Well, thank you. And we tried to do that with the September 23 thing, but I couldn't get any of the astronomers and the astronomers that we were trying to get. I couldn't get any of them to go on camera because it was such a controversial thing. So we just ran out of time. But if we'd have had, 3 months instead of 3 weeks, we probably could have got it done. And that would have been beautiful to have, a great documentary with, objective astronomers talking about how this isn't really a unique alignment. And we could have, talked about the spiritual aspects of it as well, much like we did on your show when you're so gracious to have me. And that was supposed to be a documentary, but we just ran out of time. So I'm very much in line with that, and I appreciate your confirmation on that idea for me.
Well, if you ever do get to that point and you want to get music behind it, a very good friend of mine is Cynthia Jordan, and she's an accomplished musician that's phenomenal.
Beautiful.
Put you in touch with her. She's the one that wrote Jose Cuervo, You Are a Friend of Mine.
Ah, beautiful. That'd be great. And I'd love to get you on my channel, since I messed it up last time, to talk about the cosmic deck of initiation. I found that to be such a profound deck that it's amazing to me how profound and how in tune it is. It's really tremendous. And I've had several people that have ordered it from you, and they feel the same way.
Yeah, it is definitely an oracle deck. It
really is.
And it kind of made itself. So it came through me, but it wasn't of me. So
interesting.
I had painted personal mandalas for about 20 years. There are about 500 of them all over the world. So, but that will be for another time.
Absolutely. But I thank you for allowing that to come through you, because it's been very profound in my life, and I've given myself a crash course on it and have been using it with folks, and they really are being profoundly affected by it as well. So it is truly an oracle deck. There's no doubt about it.
Well, the purpose of it was to be positive, to give people stuff to work with, to open them to the potential they had within themselves instead of steering them in other directions.
That's
Jeffrey, thank
powerful.
you so very much. Tonight was as exciting as the last time.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Mine too. Bye-bye now.